and welcome to Of Tongues and Voices. I'm Ojiugo Uche, co-founder and CEO of Genti Media, and I'm excited to bring this conversation to you. This is our second Of Tongues and Voices episode. On Of Tongues and Voices, I will be inviting varied guests from writers to actors to entrepreneurs to community builders, language learners, and more to discuss the power of language, the meaning of expression and creation at the intersection really of African languages and culture. And it is my pleasure today to be having a discussion with Ifunanya of who is of Ojiabiala, the Igbo Podcast. She's the convener, the host, the founder. She's a language learner and also a doctor of physical therapy. But in her capacity here, she's coming as in her capacity as the Ojiabiala and Igbo Podcast host. Welcome, Ifunanya. Great to have you with me today.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So, Ifunanya, I've mentioned a bit, just very briefly about you, and I'll say for those that might be listening to this and don't know what Ojiabiala and Igbo Podcast is. It is a community. It is more than a community. It's a lot of things, and I'll let you speak on it in a bit. But it is in part, a community of language learners, also sourcing materials for language learning, particularly Igbo language. So I will give it over to you, Ifunanya, to maybe give us more details about it as we kick off.
Yeah, sure.
And about you.
So as you mentioned, my name is Ifunanya, and I am the founder of Igbo Podcast, as well as our sister brand, Obodo Full Circle. And basically, it's a platform that bridges the gap between people back home in Nigeria, back home on the African continent, and those abroad who just want to gain a more enriched relationship with their culture. So we do this primarily through language. We use language as our vehicle to learn more about culture, to learn more about history, and it's just really about kind of trying to connect people back home.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, great to be having this conversation with you. And as we go into it, I just want to share a bit about, my journey encountering you and us coming to this point, right?
Sure.
I think over maybe the last 3 years or so, I had been aware of Ojiabiala, the Igbo podcast, passively following it, liking some things here and there, but not really as engaged. But I remember when we were starting Genti Media, where I focused on, of course, having African stories in African voices and in African languages. And beyond just stories, right? There's also like dramas, language learning materials. And as we were gathering and beginning to expand, actually, even when we were starting, we reached out to you. You were one of the first persons we reached out to because I was like, while I've been following this, it would be great to host the Igbo podcast and have it on Genti Audio as an additional distribution point, to also go with the other language learning materials limited that we had at that time. You said yes, graciously, we hosted it. Yours was one of the first podcasts that we hosted. But even beyond that, right, going further, when we finally began to get more and more Igbo content, of course, it was then time to also reach out once again to you, having at that point listened to the latest episode of Ojiabiala and Igbo podcast on Genti and hearing your journey, and how you got to that. So I was, when I listened to that, I was very excited. So when we got and onboarded a bunch of Igbo content, radio dramas, discussions about Ilu Igbo, about proverbs, I was like, what better person to reach out to again to tell about this and to try to have a discussion. And I was floored and excited when you replied, also being extremely excited because of course you have this large, here you are, you have this large following of
Oh my
14,000
gosh.
across, people on Instagram, and we're this young, small, up and coming startup trying to, get out there in front of communities. And someone like you with your community being excited and seeing that mutual benefit was just like, that's what we're trying to build. And for you to see it was really amazing. So that's a bit about how then we started talking and talking more and seeing what are collaboration opportunities, where this conversation, which finally led to this conversation. But anyway, in all of that, I think one thing I mentioned was your, some of what I've, heard from you in our conversations, but also, listening to some of your other, discussions with other people and hearing what brought you to, um, founding Ojiabiala, an Igbo podcast. Your trip to Nigeria in 2017, coming, staying here for months, learning Igbo, being immersed. Here is a picture I found. This was your second. This was your second picture. Here is a picture for those just listening. Is a picture of Ifunanya
Oh,
being from
Chivo.
somewhere in Igbo land. And it was a video and being spoken to and like using that as a learning opportunity. So I just want to, I've heard some of it, but it would be amazing for you to share a bit more with those listening and those hearing for the first time, like that journey, what it was like and how, what even triggered that journey and the desire to come and, immerse yourself more in Igbo learning and environment.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for asking. And wow, that's a throwback. But I do love that picture. It was actually a very sincere moment too. I was in my maternal home in Imo State. And we were preparing for like a big event. And so everybody was, not sapu. So I decided to, help lend a helping hand. Um, and so that's kind of how that came about. So it was actually a very genuine moment. But for me, and I think a lot of people in the diaspora, our Igbo culture has influenced so much of our lives, like from the most minute things to, very defining things. But there's a huge disconnect that we feel not being able to fully tap into the language, whether that's I can hear it, but I can't speak it, or I can't hear, I can't speak, or whatever the case might be. So since I was younger, I've always wanted to learn how to speak the language. And I think in general, I'm learning about myself that I'm just a lover of like languages and cultures. But since I was younger, I've always wanted to learn how to speak Igbo. I've even like gone to my mom at a point and was just like almost cried out to her, like, I really want to learn how to speak this language. And at that point, she was like really receptive to it, but she had to even tell me like, all right, then let's start. But you have to stop laughing at yourself. You have to stop being so shy, that type of thing. Um, but I can also recall when I was much younger, I used to have like a notebook and like try to write down words and what is this in Igbo, but then also being told by like my parents, like, I beg, go sit down and do something better, like go read your book type of thing. So finally for me, before starting graduate school, I was working full time and I like, kind of made a decision that instead of just, I'm going to be working for the rest of my life, well, hopefully not, but, work is always going to be there. Why don't I spend this time before I start graduate school doing something that's less about like, what I want to be in terms of profession and about who I want to be. And who I want to be is someone who has more access to my culture, someone who can communicate in my native tongue or my parents' native tongue, and someone who, feels a stronger connection to the culture and language that has defined so much about me. So I decided to make what I call my pilgrimage to Nigeria. And I actually didn't know how long I was going to stay there for. And even in going, I had a lot of discouragement and some encouragement. And in general, just some, uncertainty on my own of like, what is this experience going to be like? I didn't really have everything mapped out. It was very much so taking a leap of faith. And it ended up turning into me spending about 6 months in Nigeria, traveling around most or a lot of Igbo land and some other places in Nigeria as well, and really improving on my speaking ability and also my comprehension. And just throughout that journey, I literally went from not being able to form a sentence in Igbo to being able to converse with people. Like I even remember there was a time when I was in my village and I was angry and I was yelling,
Mm.
like going off in Igbo. And I remember like, it will check me out. Like
That's when you know it's now entering, when you can switch it up in the
like on that
language.
double for my like, hey, okay. Like I literally, but it was also funny because I was going in, but when I couldn't find the words, I was just like, but the fact that I had the courage and it wasn't even like I didn't tell myself to speak
Mhm.
Igbo when I was angry. It was just because I had gotten so used to like speaking it and in that environment that I just kind of went off in Igbo and spoke what I could. Really was just like, oh snap, this is going somewhere. Um so that's kind of that story.
Yeah, what a leap, right? And as he said, like taking that leap of faith and saying, at this juncture, I want this is what I want to do and focus. I thought it was very powerful when you said thinking about, not only what you want to do professionally, but who you want to be, and that being someone rooted in their culture. I think for me, from there, there's several threads that I want to pull on, right? From some of what you've said. I think the first for me is to actually see, interestingly enough, that though we have on the surface very different stories, I feel like, also it's very kindred spirit to you. For me, Igbo was my first language.
Oh nice.
Yeah. So Igbo was the language. So at home we would speak Igbo, like there's a story of my elder sister when she was turning one, and they invited a bunch of kids and said, "Oh, everyone, start dancing." And she was looking around, wondering what people were doing, until they said, "Akumbugba wegu, gba wegu," before she started, dancing because she couldn't understand, English as well. She went to school. And I have recollection of even, turning to my younger brother when I was, maybe 9 or 10 and asking, how do you see this in English? Right. However, there I was, Igbo was my first language, but then I go to boarding school, we start speaking more English, in school. It starts becoming 70% Igbo, 30% English, starts becoming 50-50. Before you know it is like 90-10, and you think you're speaking Igbo. And so I feel as though my Igbo learning, and I felt as though my Igbo learning sort of paused at maybe a 12-year-old Igbo. Um, and I had also never lived in the East. So there was this thing that I just realized now, also talking to people, where it's like I speak a very concoction Igbo. People say you're adding like five different dialects, but I'm like, you're understanding me, right? So I feel like it stopped at that 12-year-old version of my, like, maybe even younger, right? And there was that desire to go deeper and to, because even like on a 12-year-old Igbo is very conversational. What about the proverbs? What about those next level things? Because yes, I'm understanding you guys, but there's some things you're saying I'm not quite picking. There's some like nuance, there's some depth, and that in a way was the catalyst for Genti media, right? Which means to listen in Igbo. And looking for more content that could help deepen my Igbo led me to one of the first works. And so I think it's very interesting when I also look at you and your story. Like on the surface, it seems very different, right? Someone who was learning, almost from scratch versus someone who it was their first language, but really wanting to go deeper. And so that's one thing I just wanted to see. And I think I find it very exciting as well that the Ojiabiala Igbo community, Igbo podcast community caters to a wide variety of people, right? Both those who are learning, from scratch, and also those like me who are looking to go deeper and to, like listen to things about Igbo proverbs. But I think that also leads me to sort of the second thing I wanted to pull on, which was navigating, navigating through your community and taking responsibility for learning and improving versus bringing in, family members and so forth. So, I think I wanted to bring that up because you mentioned your parents and, saying, oh, go read your books. Or, for me, it was my mom where sometimes I would, especially when we went back to the East and, I could tell when she was talking to her siblings that the Igbo she was using was deeper. I mean, it just was, right? Like, and then she'll turn to me and her Igbo, it becomes like 80% Igbo, 20% English, and it's like Igbo light, right? And so I think there was once I was like, hey, mommy, like, not in a contentious way, but hey, you're doing that, right? And so I'm just curious for you, where what have those conversations been like, and how are you now sort of involving, your parents and the other members of your family who do know how to speak this language, without, say, blame, or, in a in a conversation, right? That is in communion and not antagonistic.
Sure. So I would say, at least with my parents, I try to speak it with them and just use them as people of practice.
Hmm.
Um, Not so much of teachers, unless I'm asking for a specific way that we say something in like my dialect. Um, just because I've learned early on that um, just because you can speak the language doesn't mean you can teach it. And I think that's a big, um, reality for us at Igbo Podcast that we have looked at how to surmount. But so I use my parents as extra points of people to practice the language with and to learn the things that I know, what's my dialect and what's not, help me decipher through, what I'm speaking and why I'm saying it that way, whether it's because I learned it, whether it's my dialect, that type of thing. Um, and I think just in general, like my father sometimes he'll be like, "Oh, you're not speaking our dialect," or something like that. But I'm just like, "But aren't I speaking?" Which you did not teach me. And over time, I think he's just appreciated that I'm speaking, and he'll like speak it back to me, and like I can just tell there's this kind of deeper connection when we're talking about something and we're able to have it and speak about it in Igbo. Um, so I think that that's been a really wonderful part of this experience for me. Um, that's kind of the relationship that I use or work with my parents on that.
Yeah, practice, extra practice bodies. But you're right. It's also has sometimes like just to go away from. I think my mom might have Igbo to me is still, a bit watered down, but that's fine. I find other ways by listening to stuff, to get like deeper versions of Igbo. Um, okay, I think I something I also wanted to, when you were talking and that we haven't talked about yet is the name Ojiabiala. And I think, Ojiabiala, an Igbo podcast. So I know Oji is kola nut. And of course, my name is Ojiugo, which, I think for those listening who might not know, in the Igbo tradition, the kola nut is very significant. We have a proverb that says, "Uyin wetere Oji wetere ndu." He who brings kola brings life. And I think also in some of your inspiration, it's also about the fact that, anybody that comes to an Igbo place, it's offered kola nut, right? So in communion and in community. And that's in part what you're trying to do, like build community as well. So I bring that up because today when I was preparing, I just realized that it's also interesting because my name is Ojiugo. The fact that, I came to you, and if you think of it, Oji Abiala, like I've come. So and now we're in communion. So yeah, Igbo pun moment there, but a double entendre there. But so Abiala meaning, has come. But tell me more maybe about, because I think I gave maybe the cliff notes. I know there's an inspiration behind that as well. Work you cite. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about what else inspired, that name.
Yeah, sure. So yes, you did give the cliff notes. It definitely has to do with the significance of Aji in the Igbo culture and how it references communion. I actually talk about this in like the very first introduction episode, but I think more than anything, it's the fact that Aji, and thank goodness, is something that I think Igbo people have really preserved. They say Aji doesn't speak English, so whenever you are like blessing a kola nut, it's always in Igbo language. So part of the name is a reminder to us that, like, in order for, you know, us in the diaspora and first, second, whatever generations, in order for us to continue to take part in these, significant cultural experiences and things like that, we will need the language in order to do that. So it's like basically a reminder of, you know, this way of communing, both for the living, the dead, the, you know, God's dearly departed, all of that good stuff. It's basically reminding us to make sure that us who are still here are still able to partake, are able to, sit at the table and, take in this very beautiful culture. Um, so that's kind of the significance of the name.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, and the emphasis you also put on, the fact that in order to break Kula, one needs to speak the language. I think this then leads me into, a question around, language and belonging, which we've already started talking about, communion. I think for me, I come to this right in two forms because again, the Genti platform is not it's yes, I'm Igbo. The name derives from Igbo, but it's also for language learners for different languages. Different African languages, whether that be Pidgin or Hausa, which I'm learning, or Yoruba, or we currently have 4,000 hours of content in 12 languages. But I came to this like language learning and its place in belonging, right? Both from the Igbo part and the fact that a deeper understanding of the language, where I know the proverbs, like lends more community and spaces to me, but also in my like learning of Hausa, which I started learning seriously during my National Youth Service days.
What
Um,
what inspired learning Hausa?
what inspired it? So I mean, I sort of learned it, or I did it in school, in secondary school, but I didn't really learn it. But I did my national youth service in the north, and it was in Kebbi State. So in that community, they spoke Hausa, but also Chilela, another language. I picked up a bit of Chilela, but Hausa is, in many ways, lingua franca of the north. And I think there was an opportunity there to deepen my community because whether it was my pastor's wife and the kids are going to make kuli kuli there, or the folks coming to play in my compound, having access to the language gave me spaces for more community,
Yeah,
and open things up for me. And yes, I'm still learning it, right? But is I noticed the difference when I could formulate words and engage. And so I
yeah,
was curious then about giving that space and understanding from my end. Wanted to know the fact that you came to Igbo learning and creating this community and these resources that you have in Ojiabia from a place of learning the language. I'm curious to know, since learning it, understanding how that has affected your sense of belonging in community, whether it's Igbo communities, Nigerian communities in the diaspora.
definitely. Even when you were talking about Hausa and, even just beginning to learn a few words, how like it just opens up the space of community. I think that's a very real thing for Igbo learners as well, even being an Igbo person. As I mentioned, I feel like my connection talking to my dad about certain things has expanded and has deepened because of it. Um, I feel like during my like pilgrimage in Nigeria, being able to say certain things, even to like keke drivers or um, in classrooms and things like that. I think it also made people feel like I want to be a part of you all, not that I want to
Mhm.
be like an other. Um, and I think that welcomes me into things. Um, and I think just in general, like it, people, there's this quote, I'll forget what it says, but it's like if you speak to a man in his language, you're speaking to his heart. And I think
Mhm.
that a lot of times, even if you're messing up words, even if you're, if you're earnestly trying, people can see that you're trying to make like a real connection to them as they are. And so I feel like it has welcomed me into like different communities and spaces, being able to speak more and more Igbo.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you with the whole. It's what's it called? Like language of your heart, right? Someone's local language is in many ways the language of your heart, and good to hear too that what drew you. You are getting that, and you are experiencing that greater sense of belonging. Um, okay, fantastic. So I think at this point, we've been talking a lot about sort of, your journey, language and belonging. I want to, at this point, maybe talk a bit more about the Ojiabiala, um, an Igbo podcast community that you've been building, and also, interacting with other language learners, what that has been like, so your journey as, in a way, right, like an entrepreneurial convener of sorts. And before you go, I just wanted to also say that I love, love, love how in all your podcasts you start with, "Hi, I'm Ifunanya." I hope I'm paraphrasing here, but something to the I am Ifunanya. I'm a language learner just like you, right? Ifunanya, I feel like that just personalizes it, right? Like even me hearing it, I'm also an Igbo learner, right? So it's like, okay, yes, we're on this journey together. So I love that, by the way. So would love to hear more about sort of the journey building the community, the resources themselves. Yeah.
Well, definitely. Sorry, I knew exactly what you were going to say. A lot of people have mentioned that. So I'm glad it's something that resonates with a lot of people. And I think for me, it was important. Like I didn't, it wasn't a master plan or anything like that. It was just kind of important for me to set the stage of like, even though I'm orchestrating this, I recognize that I'm learning as well, which is a strength and weakness of mine. So the strength is, I'll be asking questions that other people might ask, or I'll be, presenting the language from a perspective that's relatable to the person listening. But then also, I'm in the same boat. I'm trying to learn this. I might be messing up my tones. I might, translate something incorrectly or find some things really difficult as well. So we are just kind of in this together. But I think in general, it's been just such a personal journey as well, and just trying to share that with other people. So in terms of building like community through it, it's just more so like this is actually what I'm experiencing as well. And if you're experiencing this too, whether you are, at the very beginning, like beginning stages of the process, or if you're actually quite advanced and you just kind of want to refine things, or just be in a space where a lot of the language is being spoken or whatever the case might be, this is the space for you. So I think just having in mind to just create that space has been a lot of the fueling for creating the community.
Yeah. So it's your personal journey now, blossoming. And so take me through, right, like from coming to like doing your pilgrimage as you call it, right? And learning for yourself to then, creating the podcasts, I think November 2018, right? First podcast was released. What made you go from like what made you say I want to share this with others, and I want to do it in a public way, right? Because there is, right, great courage in that. As you said, you are a learner, you know who the instincts might be to. I mean, I know for me, I'm learning how, so I'm not going to start doing a podcast. It takes a lot of courage. So walk me through the point of learning and then deciding to sort of throw it open beyond yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard. It's hard to learn publicly. Let me just say that right now. And I'm a semi-perfectionist, so sometimes I'm just like, oh no, no way. And I have a lot of deep love and respect for the Igbo language. So sometimes if I like make a mistake or I misspell something and I've posted it and like you don't really delete posts all willy-nilly, I'm just like, ah. So it is tough learning publicly, but I've realized how that's empowered other people. And so that fuels me to kind of keep going. But I think for me, what made me even make that transition from, my own personal journey to like welcoming others on the journey was when I started seeing results. Like when
Mm,
I tell you, honest to God. And the thing is, I've always, because of my love for Igbo, I've always, had some like comprehension of it when it's spoken because I ask a lot of questions when people are speaking. I like always kind of intentively wanted to know what I'm hearing with Igbo. So I didn't start from a beginner with my comprehension, which definitely helped. Um, but I just remembered when I started having like more Igbo peers. So instead of the people being around me that speak Igbo just being like aunts and uncles and parents, but actually being peers and them trying to converse with me in Igbo. And, they're saying things and I'm understanding it, pretty perfectly. And trying to say a sentence, I couldn't. I was like, I didn't realize I was this bad. And
mm.
so during that time that I spent in Nigeria, going through that transition from like I literally cannot formulate sentences um, to being able to hold conversations, I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to get everybody to this point and beyond. So I think
Not
for
only,
me,
sorry, may I add, not only having conversations, but shouting and getting angry. A necessity in Nigeria, might I add.
the crazy thing is that has never happened again. So I'm like, maybe I need to do the pilgrimage again, or or I need to just, continue being really intentional about speaking it like in everything. But yes, that was a turning point.
Yeah. Awesome, awesome. So great to know that. I think at this point, then, I think this is a natural place for us then to, take a commercial break from our sponsors, Genti. And when we're back, we're going to continue our conversation. I think hearing more about that journey, that courage, to also, hearing about the folks in your community, what you're hearing, what you're learning from, the journey of, as you said, you want to share this with other people, what that has been like to have with you, not only the peers you had initially, but this widening community of folks that are on this journey with you. So, really excited to continue the conversation after the break.
This one doesn't look too good. Too white like the flakes, too thin, too ugly, too weak, too much hair, filled with lies. Just too much of everything. How much does she go for? Do not underestimate her. Her look may be deceptive. She is as strong as a camel. She walked 100 miles from the Sahara to the Leke Island. She's worth the price I've given you. You can pay 30 instead of 35 shillings. I'm giving you a good price. Take her. Well, I don't believe in any God. I worship money because money answers all things. I'll pay 25. If you are not selling, then I'll go to another dealer. I don't have time to waste on some useless slave. Okay, pay the 25 shillings. I watched in silence as the first dealer counted the money before handing me over to the second man. He was happy to be free from me. I have been with him for long and nobody had been able to buy me off. And when he finally sold me, he was happy because he was not totally at loss. He bought me in the Sahara from a slave market after the merchant offloaded us from the sea to the shore. He bought me for 23 shillings and sold me for 25 after working under the scorching sun and arriving at the present port. The second dealer made me walk so fast as he led me with other slaves through the passageway. We all seemed to be between 11 and 17 years, not more than that. I was the most free among them. I was tired, hungry, thirsty, yet I had no right to complain because I was only a slave. My fate has been decided, it has been predestined, but I was not scared. I might be in a foreign land filled with foreign gods carved in different shapes and sizes. I might have lost my mother and father, with Joe, my brother, and Catherine and Deb, my two sisters, to the cold hand of war, but I'm not scared. This is Tama, a story written by Ama's Heart. My name is Ama's Heart, and I'm a Genti storyteller.
Day one. So, as you all know, if we are not at Igbo Podcast bringing you dope resources to help you along your language learning journey, then we are recommending those resources. So, I'm here to tell you today about a resource, a platform called Genti app that you absolutely need to know about. So Genti is a platform that basically brings the audio story from the African continent to you. This app is great because there are things to listen to for those who are maybe more of a beginner, as well as those who are more advanced and who just want to hear complete and conk Igbo. So I'm currently listening to Ojiugo on the app, and I'm going through it with my tutor via the Igbo Podcast program, and I just absolutely love it. I listen to it while I'm driving. I listen to it while I'm cleaning the house. It's just such a good way to continue to surround yourself with the Igbo language, so I would definitely recommend it. As well as if you're interested, like I mentioned, in listening to Pidgin, Yoruba, Hausa, this is just the app for you. Please go and check it out.
Awesome. And we are back. It was great seeing Ifunanya's face there as well, in a collaboration video we did, just showcasing some of, sharing your experiences using the Genti app for your language learning. And I think I would definitely love to talk to you more about that as part of our conversation in term with your community and how you're uh, building community of language learners and resources you provide. But before we go into how you're using Genti, just more broadly, I would also want to hear, right? So we've heard, the courage it took for you to, go out there and start getting people, other people on the journey with you. And I know you spoke briefly about what Igbo Podcast does, Ojiabiala Igbo Podcast. But I know, as you said, you have Obodo Full Circle that is out now. Do you want to run us through, I know you have conversation groups and much more. Do you want to run us through some sort of some of what is on offer and how you engage the community and how these were also added on, right? Because Rome was not built in one day. So how did this happen?
Yes, definitely. So first we have the podcast, which is available on all streaming you know platforms as well as Genti. And that's free, and it's very important to me that remains accessible to anyone and everyone. And I think everyone who continues to listen and support it, it means a lot to us. So first started there, and then I had in mind to kind of create like this conversation exchange type of program. Then that idea actually came before the podcast, but I felt like I could start the podcast first when I was ready to get started. Then after a while, I was just like, I didn't have the whole blueprint for how I wanted to start the exchange program, which is like our tutoring program. But I kind of just decided, like, let me get started. And the biggest, thought behind it was, again, my greatest language improvements came from being able to have a peer to kind of speak within Igbo. So I kind of found different people based in Nigeria who I felt had, different levels, like adept skills with the Igbo language. I went through, working with them and also training them from a learner's perspective on how to work with learners. And then from there, we just kept building our instructor base, like where now we have people who study Igbo language in university, like at UNN. So it's really expanded from just a native speaker to someone who actually like studied the ins and out of the language, um, and me in the middle, like helping to train them in how do you translate that over to a language learner and like the diaspora and the type of questions that they ask, the type of accent that they have, the type of mentality that they even have with approaching this. And so that has expanded into our tutoring program, which I'm just really grateful. We've been able to tutor like over 300 people in like several continents, several countries. And we have, what I love about the program is that we make it affordable enough because we understand that language learning is a process. So it's something that we have people who have been with us for a year or plus, because it's not just about, I'm going to give you this quick fix and that's it. It's more about continuing to improve your language learning. Like you said, for you, your Igbo kind of stopped at this 12-year-old age range type of thing. So for someone like you, and we do get people both in Nigeria and all over the world who is like, I can speak Igbo, but I want somebody to practice with. I want to be able to, like, if I had to give a debate in Igbo, if I had to like really articulate deeper ideas, feel confident in doing that, learn with us because of the structure that we have. So it's just really about meeting people at where they are at, whether it's just beginning their journey, whether they're like, rapping in Igbo, but just want somebody to rap in it on a weekly basis. It's just about kind of building that culture of making language learning a lifestyle as opposed to it just being this isolated thing from your life. So that's our tutoring program, which is we have been building the platform Obodo to better facilitate that. And then we have different offerings, like we also do group lessons, and that we're expanding to different dialects. Like we've been able to do Eberiba. We're working on like General Igbo, Ngwa, different dialects that we're trying to also support throughout the program, and like some different products like our planners. We're coming out with some children's books, so lots of different things in the works. So by God's grace, we'll really, help people along this journey and just continue to support the Igbo language and culture and build community.
Nice. I think I really, something that I love what you said, and I don't think I've necessarily thought of it this way, but you said to make language learning a lifestyle. And also there was, something else you were saying and saying support people along this journey. I think there is a sense sometimes when I think of things. One second. So yeah, so there's sometimes when I think, and I think there is a destination, right? Like there's this expert level destination, and it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's probably the world's best Igbo speaker that knows all the ins and outs and all the Ilu Igbo, like all the proverbs, and to the core and to the depth. But I love the idea of it being a lifestyle, continuing like there is we live and we learn, like that is such a phrase. And so sometimes now I'm thinking why sometimes I have a different view when I think of language. Yes, you can aim to attain a certain level of fluency. I know, for example, in some like European languages, when you take exams, there are different levels they categorize, right? But still, it's I like that idea of it being lifestyle, because it's not even just about the language, it's about the culture, which
Exactly.
yes, there is, a culture with a lot of depth, but also it's about continuing to be curious, because culture changes, right? Culture evolves. We are living in times that define culture. So I just that resonated with me, and I love that way of looking at it. Like whether it's for me deepening my Igbo knowledge, or me, bettering and getting more serious about my Hausa learning this year, and because I have Wazobia dreams, next on but I love that way of looking at it, at it being this lifestyle, and taking it and just staying curious. So thanks for sharing all those things you have in place. And it sounds, yeah, it doesn't just sound, it is amazing, right? What you're building. And now I'm curious about sort of what you're hearing also from people, from folks. the 300 plus people tutor, the people, on your page, like the engagement, right? How does that feel? What does that feel like? And what are some of the highlights for you? What have been some of the highlights?
Yeah. Oh, that's a question. um, like it surprises me. There have been a number of people who have DM'd me about like names that they want to give their children in Igbo. So like they're about to, their wives or they themselves are about to give birth to a child and they want to name them an Igbo name and they're, DMing. They message us in on Instagram and ask us, what does this mean? Am I pronouncing it right? And this or that. And one of those people, he actually messaged me twice in a span of a few years about his children's name. So I finally asked him, I was like, I'm super honored that you're doing that, but I wanted to know why is it that you're trusting us, trusting me, with that question? And obviously, I cleared that I'm a learner, so I forward those questions to people that I trust on my team, and then give them, as the dearth of information that I can provide. But I remember him just saying that he feels like one thing that he feels on the page is that it's clear who is like facilitating it. It's clear who are members of the community, and it's also very clear about the passion and dedication behind it. And so that like really touched me, because like I said, I really do try to be very intentional about what I'm putting out there, um, both about Igbo language, culture, history. I'm glad that people notice that and even feel confident enough to trust us with like naming their children. I know for some people who are Igbo speakers, they say that through the page, like they've learned some things about Igbo that they speak but had no idea that this is how it kind of works. Or some of them are learning more about Igbo reading and writing through some of the things that we post, because they haven't often been in spaces where they're seeing Igbo written out and then also hearing it, that type of thing. Um, for learners, it's been really encouraging to see people go from, just kind of being able to say kedu to feeling, more empowered to hold longer conversations, to say different things. Um, I know when we did our, group lessons, and that's like a 10-week course. So it's a bit more condensed, but it's also really cool in the sense that it's a lot of learners coming together and interacting with each other directly. Um, it's really powerful seeing from day one to like day 10 and like having people really holding conversations with each other and their tutors and things like that. So it's been very encouraging. Obviously, there's also times where there's a lot of effort and work that we're putting into this whole thing, that I'm putting into it. So sometimes when I just want things to just be out already, or just going off the market or whatever, and it's taking some time, that can be frustrating. But it just goes back down to like the ultimate mission of wanting to support the Igbo language, support Igbo culture, and just being privileged and honored to be a part of different resources that are doing that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And also, what an honor, right, to be asked about naming of people. And I think this is a good place for me to mention. I mean, it's an aside, but I really love your name, by the way.
Thank you. I love yours too. You're the first Ojiugo I've met. And I think
Really?
yeah.
A lot of people ask me if it's my title, because I think some women have it as titles. But I really like your name. I actually recently wrote a poem about your name.
Thank
Because I think it's like, and that's I say this also because of what you're saying about learning the language, but even beyond that, in terms of um, from a cultural perspective as well, there is depth in the language and learning, right? There's wisdom that is exposed in the Igbo language, or any language really that one is learning, right? The way people think is encoded in language, and I think Ifunanya in particular, it means love, right? That's how it's translated. But I think also like very literally Ifunanya. to look into one's eyes. I just find that to be such a powerful visual about what love means. And so, anyway, that's an aside. But I think it's amazing to be asked about naming people, and then also to see the journey that people have in terms of in the language learning journey, and what a beautiful thing to be part of and know that you're contributing to that. And you mentioned towards the end about being a part of the larger resources that people have for this. And so I'm curious, right? As I said sometime around the beginning, and you also mentioned this in the short sort of video we saw of you, short ad break. But I'm curious about what made you, accept to talk to us. We don't have, we're a young, growing company. Now have thankfully thousands of followers on Facebook. But when we started engaging with you, you were the prize, right? You're the person with the community. And yes, we had resources that would be helpful. But I'm just curious, to understand more what drew you to the Genti audio platform, and how you mentioned briefly about how you are using it personally with your tutor. But I just want to know more about how you've been finding it, and also other people in the community.
Sure, no, but first of all, thank you so much for even reaching out to us. That's an honor in and of itself to that you guys felt like we would be a good resource and support. And I really just look at it as we're all in this together, and we're all working towards similar visions of even just having our African voices, whether it's Igbo or any other voices, be heard. Um, so for me, I remember when you reached out, once I downloaded the app, and I just, first of all, I thought it was such a beautiful app. I think you guys did a really excellent job, your whole team, on that.
Thank you.
And I just saw the dearth of Igbo material that was there. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And it's because it's all in one spot. So I thought that was super helpful to have all those things in one place. And I learn a lot through audio learning. I'm also a visual learner, but there's something about, especially with language, being able to hear something that's so helpful to me. Like, I think number one, especially as being an adult learner, we're busy. We need to be able to match our hobbies and our goals with our responsibilities. So I learn a lot through listening when I'm driving, when I am, cleaning, those types of things, being able to pair it, which was why I even created Igbo Podcast, because I felt like, let me create something that people can listen to while they're at the gym, while, something that, again, looks at making this more of a lifestyle. So I love so much that your platform is like an audio storytelling platform. And I love stories. I think too, part of what makes some of our lessons and some of like the Igbo podcast experience stick is that it feels like a story, like it feels like a journey. So even like a lesson, even though it's like going over a particular part of the Igbo language, you're hearing antidotes, you're hearing, my experience with it, or then the tutor turns and tells you their experience with it. So it just makes it not this isolated thing. So I really loved when I came to this beautiful app, you see all these stories in Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, and even Pidgin. And I'm also working on my Pidgin. So that was like, oh my gosh, this is just so, like, the goodies don't end when I got to the app. But I loved so much that in one place I could listen to all of these different Igbo stories, and especially where I am at in my language learning journey, it's so helpful for me to hear like conch Igbo, like people speaking straight Igbo without any dilution or anything like that. It's also fun to me with some of your programs to try and kind of guess the dialects and, like the areas that people are probably speaking from. So I just loved it. And like I said, even in that ad, that's where I am at in my language learning journey. But there also still are materials like our podcast on your app that is super appropriate for, someone who's at a more beginner stage and maybe can't handle hearing just straight Igbo,
Yeah.
that I really, really enjoyed. So I think it was just me knowing the power of like audio learning and also storytelling that just made me so drawn to an app that puts it all in one place. And the opportunity as well to even expand and like improve my pidgin English, and that I was just so excited about, and really really honored that you guys like reached out to us to, you know, be a part of your journey as well.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Awesome. I love what you said about us being all in it together. So I'm glad that came through and that there's this symbiosis. And yes, we did create like the categories for that purpose. So that someone that is looking, so the category for Igbo content, a category for, pidgin content, so that people who have specific language learning needs can go there and listen. And I think at this juncture, as we begin to sort of round out the conversation, there's a question from the audience, which we'll take, before then hearing about, the future of um, Ojiabiala, the Igbo podcast, and maybe take some additional questions. So the question goes: how does the Igbo language and by extension culture mold or inform the way you see Nigeria and the world?
Sure. So I think in general, um, I had this French professor when I was learning French, but that's another story, who would say that language learning is about learning to see the world through a different lens. And I didn't completely know what she meant until I really started getting serious about language learning. And it's just so true. Like you're not just you're not just learning specific words, but you're literally learning how to think a thought differently when you're learning a language. Um, and so learning Igbo has given me a new, like a different world view, like a different lens to look at the world through, as well as any other language that I'm like learning. It just helps me think about the world in kind of a different way. Like you mentioned the name Ifnaya, like it can be translated as several things, but it's like this idea of seeing, when I say Aforunginai, I'm like saying I see you eye to eye. So it's just even thinking about to love somebody is seeing eye to eye, is having a level of understanding. And for me, I know understanding is one of the highest levels of love that I feel. Like when I feel understood, when I feel like that attempt for it. So it's just it kind of transformed this idea of love, that it's not just about the butterflies. It's not just, it's literally about this way that despite me being from a completely different walk of life and you being from a completely different walk of life, somehow we're able to come together and see eye to eye. And like, that's love. So it kind of just transforms it and expands how you feel about certain things when you have different lens in which to like kind of dissect them. So I think language learning has affected me in my worldview in general, and not even just when it comes to how I see Nigeria. But I do also think language learning has helped me have more access to certain things in Nigeria, like just different experiences. Before, I think my experience of Nigeria before like my pilgrimage was more of like, the person who came from Obodo Igbo, who's here for like 2 weeks or a month, and then they go back home, that type of thing. And during that time, especially as I could speak more and more the language, I felt like I became more of like just Ifnaya, like my cousin Ifnaya, my sister Ifnaya, my whatever. Like I felt more just, I felt more connected. And I think too, I went to Nigeria, like I've always had these ideas of like, charity that I wanted to do and this and that. But during that time of language learning, I like realized like Nigeria doesn't, in my opinion, there are people who need charity, but for the most part, I think people need opportunity more than anything. Like nobody just wants to live a life where they're receiving handouts. They want to be able to provide for themselves. So even in creating our exchange program where we hire predominantly people who are based in Nigeria, it's about just creating an avenue, an opportunity for people to have an extra income, for people to
Mm.
make deeper connections and network and all those types of things. So language learning has kind of expanded my view on how to empower people in Nigeria and elsewhere.
I love that. I love that. I think, to the way you answered the question is not just about like your view about Nigeria and the world, though it is about that. It's about life, right? And that's what language learning does. It opens this whole new, like, additional wisdom, right? Because if you think about it, like, human beings are just amazing, right? And all the cultures and worlds, and and it would be such a loss if we lose ours, right? Which we have access to, not just for us, but for the world, right? For like everywhere. So I love that, and just I actually got a bit of goosebumps as well, and just hearing, what you're doing in terms of, and how you're thinking about opportunity and creating opportunity through what you're doing. So I think that's a perfect sort of segue to us closing out. I think I would ask as we close out, if you can share with language learners, including myself, right? Language learners everywhere of any language, um, what would you say they should go away with? As someone who, is a highly courageous language learner. Yeah, what should we do? What should we go away with?
What you do in terms of your language learning?
Yes, in terms of our language learning.
Um, I think it's important to have fun. Like I think when you sit down and try to learn it as like a very strict course or and everybody's different. So that I'm sure that works for some people. But like when you sit down and try to be very strict about it and very like, God, I didn't get this right or I didn't get this right, it takes away from also being allowing yourself to experience it. So like even if you messed up and said like, you know, your butt looks nice and you meant to say your face looks nice because that's how it translates or something. It's okay to laugh and, learn from it and experience that. And that's just kind of part of the journey. So I would say it's just really important to have fun with language learning, to kind of fit it into daily life. So even, for example, I'm also learning Spanish, and I had like a patient who, mom and the child are like Spanish speakers. I said what I could say. I have my limitations, but I took that as a point in time to like, okay, there are two things I wanted to ask that I didn't know how to ask. And I like text my Spanish tutor and asked her, how do I say that? So at least hopefully next time, those two questions, if I can't say anything else, maybe I
Mm,
can at least say that. Um, so, and I mean, I'm speaking to myself as well because sometimes I do get discouraged because I know for me, one of the hardest things is like my accent when I speak Igbo. And like, obviously, everybody has a different accent, like when they even speak English, but I really, really want a more like, I really want to be undetectable when I speak Igbo.
mm,
So I don't want to have like an American accent, but it's hard because that's the accent that I have. So it can get discouraging, or if I'm like trying to like articulate myself in detail and I start messing up and I'm just like, oh, I'm beyond this, I'm beyond this. I have to just also tell myself, just have fun with it. What in this particular moment can you learn that you can improve on for next time? And it doesn't have to be every mistake that you made that you're learning from at that particular moment, but take one or two and hone in on that. And then hopefully that won't be a mistake next time. And you'll, slowly be chipping away at becoming better. So, um, ultimately, I would say have fun. And now we're like Organero planner that we have. It's so
mm.
much about progress over perfection. So I would just say have fun and be more concerned about progress over perfection.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. I would definitely take that lesson and or that wisdom and put into practice or continue to write. As you said, is a process. Thank you, Ifunanya, for this amazing conversation, for sharing your presence, your story with us. You can find Ifunanya and the Igbo Podcast, Ojiabialat, on Instagram at Igbo Podcast. And also wherever you're listening to podcasts, including on Genti Audio. You can also listen to some of what she's mentioned, like Ijuwa, Iberibe Warrior, Ilu Igbo on Genti audio to accompany your Igbo learning, as well as if you're learning any other, well, not every other, but at least a few other African languages on Genti audio app. Thank you, Ifunanya. Loved having this conversation, and looking forward to us continuing, to discuss outside of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really awesome. And again, I really love your program, your platform, and hopefully we can, continue to spread the gospel.
Amen.
Wanu Kadewa.
Cardi.
Oh.
Grab the mic. Tell us where your message they come from. Tell us how you take get belle. Tell us how you take become the champion of the champions for pen, mic, and stage. You don't tell we dey hear of your matter. We dey greet you, we dey see you for TV and satellite distance. Show us say you don't set. We know say you set. Grab the mic. Give us crafts wey make yesterday bam. No forget to blend down with that of today. Correct mixture, they always make sense. You know they ever miss any of your line. You don't tell, we don't dey follow your line. We dey see, we dey read, and shop rhymes from page to page, from stage to stage. Just give us your rhyme and reading. We know say, you no go comot for line. Grab the mic. For more on this, make you download Genti audio